Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am pleased to be joined by a friend of mine and a friend that actually lives in the same city. We've known each other for a long time. Alex, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Chad, thanks very much for the invite. I'm excited to be online with you here.
I would love to have done this in person, but it's actually the logistics of it are much more complicated because then we have to put a camera on each other, and it becomes much more of a production. So to do this virtually, I'm glad that you agreed to do it. What's new with you? I know we talk quite often, but I haven't had a full catch up with you. What's new in your world?
Well, one of the notable things, obviously, is that next year, 2025, will be the first Canadian Chair of NAIOP. And so we're ramping up for that. I'm personally ramping up for that. But more importantly, our big conference, CRE Converge, is next week. So there's a lot of things happen there that are important to our members, not least of which updating them on what's going on as our association. We've got some exciting things going on with chapter growth. So it's a lot of time on that. I also, as you well know, have been working with my own firm now, Prevail, for the last year. And beyond that, there's a lot happening in the market. So I've been advising some groups on transactions, other groups on potential development deals, and working with some bigger groups on growing their business too. So trying to stay active in every area, I guess.
I know that you're busy, and I think that there's a lot to unpack there. I do want to talk about NAIOP as well, because I'm a big believer. As you know, I served on the local board. I had the honor of speaking at one of the conferences, so I'm a big fan of NAIOP. And I'm so impressed that you were the first Canadian president to get elected. When I first saw that, I was like, is that a typo? Like, I thought that was a mistake. we will jump into NAIOP. We're going to talk about NAIOP more, because I think that I've told so many people about NAIOP all over North America, as I really believe it's a great organization for people to get connected with fellow-minded people. So we will talk on NAIOP, but even before we get that, what's your background? How did you get into commercial real estate, and what was your journey from when you decided to get into commercial real estate to starting Prevail? And we'll touch on Prevail near the end, but maybe if you give me your story on how you got into real estate and then how that took you to where you are today.
Well, I have a funny, or at least I think funny answer about this. If I always say to people, if I had known that Certified Mountain Guide was called Certified Mountain Guide, I would have never worked in an office in my life. As a young guy, I was really passionate, it still am, about the outdoors. I just love that. And I also really enjoy people. I'm a social person, and I enjoy variety. And because I didn't know Certified Mountain Guide was called Certified Mountain Guide, I thought, well, what have I seen people do that seems to offer them, by and large and outside of the office, work style, or at least something that's hands-on with some personal engagement? What offers connection with people, and what offers a lot of variety? And so it was really that drew me into commercial real estate. I hadn't seen a broker with a Mercedes. I hadn't got to know a business leader who'd created a real estate empire from the ground up. These were things I encountered later once I joined the industry. But that was really the impetus. I thought, well, this seems interesting. It feels like there's things that you can really do that are both practical as well as intellectually stimulating. And I find that to just be a great aspect of our industry, that if you're a person who has a creative impulse, that you're a self-starter, self-motivated, it's just a tremendous industry. So that was my launch point, if you will, almost by happenstance, that I got into commercial real estate. Once I'd made that decision, I was very fortunate to get into the real estate program, land economics program, as we called it, which at the time was the number one land economics program in the UK, tied with Cambridge University, and so now called the University of the West of Scotland. I attended there, and the great strength of that program was that we had a placement year where you worked in industry and you really saw what the business was about day to day. and it just fueled my enthusiasm for the business. And ultimately, I ended up moving to Canada, started work here, and initially I worked with a brokerage because I think that's a solid way for people coming into the industry. It's a solid way to get well grounded. Some people make a tremendous career out of it and enjoy it. For me, it was a great way to get to know who's who in Canada, to understand the differences in the way that the market works here versus in Scotland, and then was fortunate again to move from an excellent firm with really good mentors to an excellent firm with really good mentors, and so I've gone through a couple of development companies, most notably One Properties, where I was senior VP, and also Cameron Developments, and gravitated eventually a lot towards retail. I think that partly came about because of opportunity. Honestly, One was keen to grow, add strength in that new area, and so I really had a big launch pad there with the ownership of One. Really backed me as a young guy to do a lot, and I loved it. It was a great opportunity, and yes, that sort of brings me around to today, and I try to retain that enthusiasm for our industry, the positive effects that we can have, the tremendous positive effect it's had on my life. Got me my skilled worker permits in Canada on the back of my land economics degree. It's given me a very enjoyable career with good friends like yourself and other people as well. So it's really been a good fit.
Yeah, you've definitely carved out a very good niche in the industry. You're very well known, you're very respected, and having that diverse background all the way from your land economics education to brokerage to development, and now even in leadership roles with NAIOP, I think you bring a great perspective to anybody that's already in the industry or even anyone that's thinking about getting into the industry.
Well,
At what point? Yeah, well, it's well earned. Congratulations on that again. At what point did you get into NAIOP? Was that in brokerage, or was that when you went to development side?
Yes, when I moved already to the development side, I had really not done much with NAIOP until a couple of things were going on in Calgary, where the NAIOP Calgary chapter, with its members, companies like One Properties, needed to engage with particularly the municipality on government awareness and government advocacy issues. And that was sort of the trigger for me to become a bit more aware of what was going on and what NAIOP did as distinct from some of the other associations that are also valuable in our industry. And when the Edmonton chapter started, initially I wasn't actually all that involved, but when Colin Clish and a couple of Brad Hoffman, a couple of other guys came to me and said, we think there's a real role that NAIOP can play that other folks haven't yet, which is to step up on this whole government awareness of what our industry does, the value of what our industry brings to our community. And that resonated with me, whether you're a user of commercial space or a builder or owner of commercial space, you find out pretty quickly that any sort of misalignment between what you're intending to do and what government or regulators are seeking to do can really be paralyzing. And so that resonated with me, got me interested in NAIOP high level. And through that, I was able to attend one of our US-based events, and that really opened my eyes to, what's now close to 22,000 members can accomplish when they unify together and speak up for the things that are important to them.
So for those not familiar with NAIOP, it used to stand for the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties. A few years ago, they abandoned that name, but kept the acronym. So you still hear the NAIOP said everywhere, but now it's just the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. Is there actually a formal name for it?
Yeah, exactly. And you're quite right. Chad, that over the decades, coming up 60 years now of NAIOP, the breadth of the association has grown to reflect the breadth of our members. So even if you look at myself coming in as chair next year, I have done industrial, I have done a bit of office, better known, as I say, for retail. At the moment, I'm actually looking at mixed use projects with colleagues. And I think many of us who are industry professionals, brokers or owners or whichever area, we're all increasingly having to work in that broad sense. So NAIOP really is a broad church now. We have people whose focus is industrial and office, assuredly. But if you look at our Developer of the Year award winners over the last decade, it's not a little uniform, one office, one industrial, one office, one industrial. There's a number of sectors represented, and some of the most impressive projects, in my view, have been some of the mixed use projects, just reflecting what best practices are in all sorts of areas, from lifestyle and employee wellness through to architecture and the built environment. So yeah, the association's responded and changed as the industry has grown and changed.
Yeah, it really has, and it's also expanded. NAIOP has grown, and I know it's continuing to grow. Before we get there, because I actually do want to just get some stats from you on size. You mentioned 22,000 people, but even just chapters. But even before that, I think everybody that looks at NAIOP and even is a member, as I am myself, I think everybody will get something different from it. And I think that's what works well for an organization like this. There's the government advocacy part that you mentioned. I love the update and the research and the power of the community. I've just made some really good connections, not just even here, but in all across North America. I've made some really good connections directly as a result of NAIOP. So it's an organization I recommend all the time to people that just want to grow their network, because there is 22,000 members, and is it 53 chapters? Is that how many there are?
We're 54 as of about a week ago, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So just continuing to grow but yeah.
What's the 54th market?
Gulf Coast. So Alabama, Mississippi, and so on. And a value that I've seen, and I know that you've seen too, Chad, is exactly what you said, relationship based. And so a good value that we have as an organization, we don't parachute in and say, oh, you're New Orleans, you guys should have a chapter, and then tell them what we think they should focus on and who their members should be. It's relationship driven. So the people in that market who saw a need for whether it's education or networking or advocacy or a combination, we support it as a North America association and walk people through some of that early startup stage, because we've seen it 54 previous times. And there's really, I think there's a big benefit beyond just engaging with local issues. As you mentioned earlier, you spoke at our conference last year in Seattle. We had people from all over the United States and Canada, including markets where we don't have a chapter, because hearing from educated speakers, from learning about best practices in other markets, that's a valuable resource, and many people gravitate towards that as maybe their favorite part of NAIOP.
So that's from my angle is the networking, the research that gets put out. I read a ton of articles and research reports that NAIOP puts out, and I just find them fascinating. The government advocacy, there's also the education component, which I think a lot of people might not even know about. So what does NAIOP do on the education front?
Well, the benefit is, again, that you've got a local organization with North America-wide resources and reach. So depending on what you're seeking, we run educational events that might be highly focused and localized to your market. If there's something coming up, see with like a zoning bylaw changes we had notably in Edmonton a year or two ago, we ran events specifically on that, brought in people from the city to talk about what they were doing and why and how it might affect members. At the macro level, you also have the opportunity, as the 7 or 8 people did in the last couple of weeks, to gain a full certificate in commercial real estate through NAIOP's online courses. So there's advanced real estate finance, principles of development, a number of courses that actually build together into a comprehensive program. My son himself actually is quite keen to get started on one of these. You know, he's a university age young guy. He's considering what he wants to do in the future. Here's his dad banging on about real estate being a good career, and so he's looking into those courses. And they're not only for industry entrance either. We're very deliberate about having courses and options available for people who are long-standing industry members. And another piece that people maybe don't hear about with NAIOP right at the start, but that many NAIOP members say is their highest return on investment, is participating in our forums program. So if you're a YPO, EO member, or you're familiar with that program, it's reminiscent of a program like that. You're grouped with others who are in a similar sector of industry or a similar sector as far as career progression, and spread out in a way where you can talk frankly and freely about the issues you're dealing with without giving the game away, perhaps on a deal that you'd need to keep to yourself. And that area really has been a tremendous growth area for us as an organization and for our members, whether developing leaders, which is what we call the 35 and younger cohort, or the CEOs who increasingly are looking for chances to group together so that they can learn from one another, share best practices, and be inspired by what other people are doing in the industry.
The developing leaders program in itself is a great option for anybody new into the industry, or even have 5 or 10 years in the industry, because you really do get a lot of opportunities to have functions and events and get to know other people that are maybe facing similar challenges or the same stage of life. I've encouraged a lot of people to do that, and there's even a few people in our office that go to regular events. So I think the developing leaders itself is a great way for that next generation of leaders and performers to really cut their teeth. So I encourage it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on to that, Chad, that what I think is especially good. You and I both in our 30s were already into leadership positions. We were already doing all sorts of things in our career that we will be proud of, I think, for the rest of our career. If you work at Avis and Young, to pick on a company, I believe I'm right saying that Graham Young started that company for sure while he was in his 30s, and perhaps even while he would have still been young enough to qualify as a developing leader. And so, people in their 35 and younger are impactful members of our industry. So there's a real opportunity there, first, to show that you're already a person of impact. Second, to demonstrate that impact by engaging in industry leadership, and that value carries right the way through to our executive committee, which is the senior leadership body within NAIOP. We make a point to have a developing leader representative as a contributor and participant in our executive committee meetings, and I think that's a huge opportunity too for a person in their 30s or early 30s who's ambitious. You get access to all manner of resources, and I think that's a big advantage.
Yeah, I've been involved in numerous organizations over my career, and I know that there's a lot that when you're younger, especially, and I've done this, you don't feel that you're necessarily fitting in, and you don't feel like you're adding anything to the conversation. You almost feel like you're taking up a spot, whereas NAIOP is the opposite. They really foster that bringing in that next generation of leaders, and it's encouraged and it's celebrated. And I think that alone is why I've recommended so many people, especially those developing leader age group, to look at NAIOP, because you're not feeling like a duck out of water. You're actually feeling that you're encouraged to be there. So I know I'm beating the drum on that a lot, but anyone, especially under 35, would find a lot of value from NAIOP. What are your goals as president for coming up in 2025?
Well, I tried to encapsulate them into a theme, partly because it makes it easy for me to be able to remember them as I try to share them. Also, I hope that it's a way to make my aspirations for the organization resonate with others. No organization is led by one person. It really must be a collective effort. And so the theme that I chose for my year as chair is there's only one NAIOP. Part of the impetus for this, if you go to a football match, that's to say a soccer game in the UK, the fans will all sing, there's only one, and whatever the name of the team is. And I thought, I wish that we could bring that same pride, that same determination to be the best, to be unique, to be the industry leader into what we do as professionals, and more importantly, into what we do as an association. And so part of the reason in saying there's only one NAIOP is let's be that group that is determined and personally committed to be the best. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up. Our Canadian members, I would say in the last few years, we've accomplished a lot at the Canadian level, and it's been because volunteer members like you and I have chosen to not just see that we could do better, but to be determined to be part of it getting better, and then collaborating with our staff here locally and across North America to really drive those outcomes. So that's part of the theme. Second part of it is it can be a little isolating, I suppose, in real estate. We are in many ways a local business. Our tenants, our colleagues, we're focused on local markets. But many of the issues that we're dealing with, whether you're in Edmonton or Tulsa, whether you're in Florida or Fresno, these are the sorts of issues that we're seeing universally: the office vacancy, the challenge of financing deals in the current market, the need for innovation, the amount of regulation that's impacting anything from warehouse locations to apartment construction. These would be familiar topics in any of our 54 chapters. So I think there's a lot of similarity and overlap. And when our members see it and can align around it, maybe you're going to share a best practice from Edmonton with the members in Washington State. Maybe the folks in Massachusetts have a solution that they can share with Oklahoma that the folks there haven't yet experimented with. So there's that. And then lastly, I wanted to say there's only one NAIOP, because I think it's really important that each of our members is convinced that their input, their perspective, their view is not merely welcomed, but will be heard, is resonant, that people want to know about that fresh perspective. Brian Walker, who's our current chair, 2024, he has the first ever too, actually. He was the first person who joined NAIOP as a developing leader and progressed to become the chair. This year, 2025, I'll be the first Canadian to be the chair. And as far as we can tell, I'll also be the first person born outside of North America to be the chair of NAIOP. And I hope even just these little things prove to people that we are open to these fresh perspectives, we're open to fresh points of view, and we need that input from the full range of our members, the architects, the developers, the brokers, the financiers, the lawyers, to really drive the industry where it wants to go, where it needs to go, and where the association ought to be.
Yeah, very well said. And I'm looking forward to your leadership next year as a member myself, and also just as a friend. I think that one point that you touched on is also really important, and I wanted to highlight that, is that it's not just developers that are members of NAIOP. It's first real estate development. There might be an overtone there that's all that it's catered to, but it goes well beyond that. Like you said, there's lawyers involved, brokers are very involved. You might have architects, planners. What type of uses do you think, or what type of professionals do you think are well suited for NAIOP?
Yeah, great. That's a great question, Chad. I would like to say that really, if you're working in the commercial real estate sector, even if you're perhaps more focused on the accounting around private real estate corporations, as an example, there will be valuable things that you can bring to the organization and the association overall. Because, as an example, you're going to have perhaps more insight into the common challenges that your customers are having around their financing, or the impact of a tax change than the developer themselves may have. So I think if your business touches on NAIOP, or touches, I should say, on commercial real estate, there's a good reason to be involved with NAIOP. And you mentioned earlier, and this is a good point, that there's levels to kind of get started. So if you have a local chapter heading along to one of the events and just seeing who else is in the room with you, that's a pretty low barrier to entry to get a little bit of an exposure, see if it resonates with you. You've mentioned several times, and I must mention our research foundation, the caliber of the documents that they produce regularly. It's not whatever me in my free time trying to type off a blog post. This is leading academics and industry practitioners across North America writing these papers, and quite often it's a collaborative process between a professor or a highly academic writer and an industry professional or participant together. And that balance of the research work, I think, is a great way for people to get involved too. So, if you're thinking about it, I'd start with one of those two ways. It's pretty straightforward to do. And then from there, you can build up, see how you want to get more engaged.
Yeah, great point. I have a networking tip as well for people that are perhaps apprehensive or just not confident enough to go to a networking event. And I think everybody is like, okay, yeah, no, I want to go to more networking events. I understand that I should do this for my business. But if they don't know anybody, that can be very intimidating. So what I would say is, if you wanted to check out a NAIOP event, or any event for that matter, if it's another business club or whatever it is, reach out, go onto the local website, see who their board of directors is, see who their executive director is, and just send them a quick note and say, hey, I'd love to attend a upcoming function, but I don't know many people. Is there any way that you could just help me feel a little bit more comfortable here, or make some introductions? And in my experience meeting a lot of NAIOP board members and leaders across North America, they would all jump on that opportunity to either grab a coffee with you beforehand or make some email introductions, so that you went to that first networking event having already known somebody, or at least somebody's going to make some introductions for you, so that you're not standing in a corner by yourself wondering who you should talk to. Because I've done a ton of networking over the years, and I've found that if I just know one or two people in any event that I'm going to, that all of a sudden opens up so many opportunities, because I can just go and say hi to them. They might be talking to a group of other people, so you might get introduced to a few people, and then it spirals where all of a sudden now you're engaged in numerous conversations. But if you don't have that if you don't know somebody, and this is still me 20 years later after doing networking events, if I don't know anybody, I still find it tough to just break into a conversation with somebody cold. So reach out to somebody on the board, reach out to the president of the chapter, the executive director, and just say, I want to go to a networking event. I want to check out one of these things. Is it possible to meet somebody in advance, or would somebody make some introductions? I know you well, and I'd do the same thing. If someone reached out to me, I would go out of my way to help that person out. So a little bit of a tangent there, but that's one thing you can do that will really help your networking.
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice. Something that I would be more than happy to say, somebody reached out to me and said, could you make 20 minutes for me? I know this about you too, that in general, those of us who have chosen, as you and I have done, to volunteer and get involved with an association, generally are people who are trying to push things forward for the whole industry, not merely for ourselves. Otherwise, we'd have just stayed at home cold calling instead of getting involved with something else. And so I think you're 100% right, Chad, that if somebody is cautious about attending, they're not sure that they can fit, reach out to your local board. That they may even have a staff member who would be able to give you a bit of an orientation. And the other thing I say to people often is that if you're worried about going along and meeting a room full of people, remember the room's full of people who are worried about coming along and meeting you. So often, if you're just able to get that first handshake in and introduce yourself to people, it lends itself to a conversation. And then, as you said, before you know it, there's all kinds of little spider webs of connection occurring. And our industry is often local. It's often interconnected. You may not know the person that you're bumping into, but there's a chance that they know one of the clients that you work with, or a tenant that you've dealt with before, or had a similar experience in dealing with a bank as you're about to share with them. And it can, depending on your personality, it can be tricky to make that first step. Pick out an event that you think is suited to you. And I love your piece of advice. Start with somebody that's on the board, that's already got that level of commitment to the association. I'm hopeful that you're going to feel very welcome and that you're going to have a good experience.
Yeah, I think that could work wonders for people. And there's people that are just very outgoing and they're not going to have any problem and they can just slide right in and make conversations. But when I first started and I was trying to crack into the industry, I didn't know anybody. I found it very intimidating. So approach it from the standpoint that, exactly as you said, the board, for the most part, and all the people that I've met anyways, there could be outliers, but for the most part, anybody at the board level is very committed to the growth, not just of NAIOP, but of the organization. And they're more than likely to be willing to grab a coffee beforehand or meet you at the event itself and introduce you to some people. Most people are going to be very receptive to that. So take a little bit of initiative that will make the event and your networking in general so much more beneficial and enjoyable too. Yeah. So on that topic, big event coming up next week. I can't make this one. I was at the last one in Seattle, so I'm unfortunately can't make this one. But what's on the agenda for next week?
Yeah, so the big event next week is our CRE Converge convention, which is being held this year in Las Vegas, and so there will be a couple of thousand NAIOP members getting together. And there's a couple of important aspects to that conference that I think are real strengths. First thing, and this is true of a few other NAIOP conferences as well, is that we have tours. And these are excellent opportunities to learn about what's going on in that market that's maybe distinct to that market, but also tends to be something that can then inspire you to think about what you're going to be doing in your own market, what best in class might look like in your next project or in your client's next project. So, I remember a number of years ago now touring some really cool kind of industrial conversions that had moved over into being, one was a craft brewery, which of course was good fun to visit. But moving around, seeing these good projects, so that's a part of the tour. And the other thing that's a bit different, for Canadian members, maybe more familiar with the forums, the comparison I would draw is that, any forum, even the Toronto forum, to some degree is trying to tell you about that local market. Our CRE Converge conference is more trying to cover off a whole series of broad topics about commercial real estate. And I've found that because of that depth, you get a exposure to things that you might not see if you were thinking more about local market dynamics or local economic data. So, meeting the organizers and creators of VTS, probably almost 9 years ago now, when it was a relatively small platform compared to billions of feet being managed through VTS these days. hearing from the architect who'd helped Prologis to design their multi-story warehouse in Seattle 8 or 9 years before we saw that built form come to Edmonton. There's a specific advantage to that too. And then, going back to the whole networking aspect, the number of NAIOP members who report in survey after survey that they've actually got a deal out of attending CRE Converges is notable as well. So it's just a good event and well worth the investment.
Yeah, I would echo that from my standpoint as well. There's a couple conferences every year that I always try to schedule around, and NAIOP is one, SIOR is another one, which that's the one I'm going to the week after. So that's why I couldn't do both this week. They're too close together. But yeah, the NAIOP one is fantastic. So I'd encourage people to check that out as well. So tell me about what you're up to now. You started your own consulting company, Prevail. What's a day in the life look like for you?
Well, it came about really in an interesting way because, as I hope is obvious, I'm passionate about our industry, passionate about the association, and I thought, well, what are some projects that I could get my head around that I'd be passionate about, that I want to get involved with, and I started looking at other practice models in other sectors, and one in particular that came to mind and that I discussed with friends who are in marketing as an example is this fractional executive concept, where rather than the very perhaps time-bound way that a consultant might use it in the past have engaged with people, there's more of an ongoing relationship. You get to know the direction of travel, if you will, for your client and what they're seeking to do. And so Prevail has been intentionally set up to allow that fractional executive model to work. So yes, there's a few people who have asked me to do a one-off, hey, could you just help me with this, and limited number of hours, and that's that. But even there, I would say that the aspiration is that over time, maybe the next time that they're doing some evaluation on a project, or that they're doing some early work in developing out a massing for a site or what have you, that Prevail would come back in and advise. And I've really enjoyed that. It's been a way to work with a few different clients. It's been a way to work on a couple of different asset types as well. And I think, it's a little bit fresh as a program in our commercial real estate space. But once I launched Prevail, really quickly, a number of guys that reached out to me, Toronto, Vancouver, as a starting point, who had held senior roles as I had with bigger organizations, and they were saying, yeah, I'm actually going to do something similar. I'm intending to be fractional in my approach as well. And so, I'm quite curious to see how this pattern grows, in my own business as well as in some of my peers as well. It seems to resonate with people.
So I'm guessing for NAIOP, you're going to be traveling a lot next year. How are you going to try and balance the workload with NAIOP and running the business?
I'm glad you asked that, because I have a sense that this dissuades some people from getting more involved, and maybe even it might have an impact with some companies too, thinking, oh, geez, like, how's our guy? Susan's supposed to be this. How's she going to be focused on that? If you look at the caliber of the people who have been the chair of NAIOP over the years, far bigger characters than me, far bigger companies than me too. Kim Snyder from Prologis in 23 comes to mind immediately as somebody who had tremendous responsibility, an enormous organization to lead. Brian Walker, who's our chair this year, who also shares an NAI flag with you, actually, Chad, has built NAI Burnscalo Real Estate dramatically as a business, while also serving as chair. In life, my granny used to tell me when I was a boy, I was always trying to get a quart into a pint pot. And so I've never really got away from that habit. I've probably taken on a bit more than I could. I think that's common for a lot of people who are ambitious and want to do things. If I look at, John Love was just here in Edmonton a day or two ago, as an example. Try telling John that he's taking on too much. I think that he's just wired that way. You know, many of the people that you and I have worked with, in addition to their day-to-day role, have served as volunteers. And more personally, I would also say that I believe a benefit that Prevail Consultants will be able to offer is that I've seen best in class in other markets. I've connected with people, as you mentioned earlier, at conferences right across the country. And frankly, if you're a US or Eastern Canadian company and you're thinking about getting engaged in Alberta, well, that's a great fit for Prevail. Maybe you don't need a 40-hour-a-week guy, but you want to have some awareness of what's occurring. Well, good. That's a good fit for me. But also, if you're an Albertan group and you're trying to understand what your next project might look like, or what you could take as some inspiration for improving your platform, I think it's advantageous that way too. So no question that I'm sure at some stage the jet lag and the in-flight meals are going to get tiresome, but I do think that there'll be some benefits for me and my business, and maybe most importantly for my clients and for our NAIOP members too.
Yeah, and I think that really wraps all up the value add that NAIOP has, but also just being involved has, is that it really does allow you to think bigger picture. And I'm with you. Local market is ultimately what drives the majority of the decisions, but there's a lot of influence that comes from other markets that might come here or might work well here that hadn't even been contemplated until somebody went through the motions of exploring what someone else was doing. So I'm with you. I take a North American wide approach and try to filter that down to a local level as well. And having that reverse reach of being able to help somebody out or make an introduction to somebody in another market, I think just adds another level of service and attention that can't be offered by somebody that only thinks locally. So I have no doubt that your career and your business is going to flourish just as a result of you being president of NAIOP. And again, I really look forward to your tenure as president. Seeing as the first Canadian as president, I think that's awesome in itself, but just knowing you personally. So really do commend you on taking the initiative to lead NAIOP in 2025.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. I have big shoes to fill, and we've had some really exceptional people as chair, and you know, I'm looking forward to stepping up into this, and you know, really trying to bring an attitude of listening to our members, being highly approachable, being passionate, and trying to infuse others with that optimism about where our industry is heading and where our association's heading. I hope those characteristics will serve us all well next year.
I have no doubt that they will. So if people wanted to reach out to you, whether it's one of the 22,000 NAIOP members or one of the virtually infinite amount of people that aren't yet NAIOP members, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, my website is prevailconsultants.com, and there's a contact form right there, and also an easy way to get a hold of my email and cell phone number too. And it gives you a little bit of a flavor of what I've done and what I'm looking to do with the platform as well. So that's one way to do it. Another way to reach out is through our NAIOP headquarters staff in Herndon, Virginia. So we have an excellent website with NAIOP that gives you breadth of exposure and understanding on what they're doing. So naop.org is the website for NAIOP North America. That's a good way to do it. And lastly, I don't do a lot of social media because I'm a bit of a privacy nerd, I admit. But I do try to stay active on LinkedIn because I think it's you know, an important way to see what others are up to and take a bit of a pulse on what's happening. So people can also find me on LinkedIn, Alex Thomson, Prevail Consultants. I'm sure we'll dig it up, and I'd be happy to hear from people through any of those venues. I will be at CRE Converge next week, so if you're an attendee, I'd love to get to meet people. I'm not a big one for formalities and titles, honestly. I'd be more than happy to catch up with people over a coffee at breakfast or whatever it looks like. And so, yeah, please feel free to reach out if you're around. And next year, hopefully visit a number of our chapters, spend time with our members. That's something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it'll be an exciting year. I'll put links to Prevail, NAIOP, and link your LinkedIn into the show notes so people can connect with you. And just really want to thank you for taking the time to do this, Alex. It's I wish you all the best for 2025, and you've got a close friend in me that can help with anything. Always happy to chat more about this as well. But I wish you all the best for 2025 and what you do with NAIOP.
Thank you, Chad. Likewise, I've seen the way that you've committed to all sorts of important initiatives for our industry, and this show being one of them. And so I appreciate you making time for me on here. I know you've had some big guests over the years, so thank you for having me on here, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
And we'll have to catch up in person too, so we can grab lunch or a drink one of these days.
100%. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, thanks again, Alex.
Thank you.